So there was relatively big news on Friday evening on the Pfizer vaccine and the boosters in particular, the latest bivalent booster. The CDC actually acknowledging a problem with the vaccine, which is rare for them, saying a safety signal had been identified, showing an increased risk of ischemic stroke, which is basically that accounts for virtually all strokes. It's the most common form. It's a blockage of the blood to the brain, and they're usually caused by clots. But in any event, an increased risk of stroke in people 65 or older. And now they go on to say, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. The risk is in the 21 days following vaccination. This preliminary signal has not been identified with the Moderna vaccine. Then they go on to say, furthermore, it's important to note that to date, no other safety symptoms have shown a similar signal, and multiple subsequent analyses have not validated this signal. And go on to say, nonetheless, we don't think this represents a true clinical risk, but we believe it's important to share this information with the public. And they recommend no change in vaccination practice. Okay. Okay. CNN reporting actual numbers, which were not in the CDC's statement, of the 550,000 seniors who got the Pfizer bivalent booster and were tracked, 130 had strokes in the 3 weeks after the shot. Now, my instincts in the COVID are probably the same as yours. If they say it's 130 out of 550,000, it's probably more. Not everybody reports or gets tracked or gets marked down, but in any event, those are disturbing numbers. And here is the headline from New York Times. New York Times, their headline on Friday. Did they make it the headline? No. On Saturday morning, the vaccine was not even on their homepage, that story. All right. It winds up in the coronavirus pandemic section of the online paper. We looked there. No. We looked there and it wasn't there. What was there was it's time to wear a mask again. Okay, that's what the New York Times wants you to know. Then if you go way, way down, they cover the news with the following headline. No increased stroke risk linked to Pfizer's COVID boosters. What? That's exactly the opposite of what the CDC says. The CDC says there's an increased stroke risk with the boosters. And the New York Times, by Apoorva Mandavelli, she's the one who made the mistake on the number of kids who had allegedly been hospitalized by COVID. She said it was 900,000. And in fact, it at best had been 63,000. She's saying no increase. Anyway, you get the gist. A pretty significant stroke risk has been identified, and it's being buried by most of the media, including the New York Times. What do you think of it, Rich?
Well, just everything having to do with the pandemic really is the reporting has been based on a certain point of view and advocacy and what journalists think is good for us and what should happen. So I'm a fan of the vaccines. I think they've saved a lot of lives, obviously, but it doesn't mean that they're not downsides. And we should just have factual reporting on these things and a reasonable debate about them. But that's what the other side on these questions opposed and tried to stop from happening over the last 2 years. We've talked about masking kids, Megyn, but you'd have no idea unless you really dug in yourself that no other advanced society had the equivalent of the CDC saying that young kids should be masked the way they were in the United States. We were a bizarre outlier, but right before the fever broke on masks, you had Glenn Youngkin in Virginia saying, well, it should be the choice of parents. And you had the White House saying he's putting kids' lives at risk, based on zero science whatsoever, just based on a distorted view of what the facts were that they then piled this moral panic on top of, and it's happened again and again.
I find this whole, the sequence of events here is right on brand, Charles. We find out there's a safety concern with one of the vaccine's boosters, Pfizer vaccine booster. And the New York Times immediately rushes to both bury the story and, to the extent they cover it, to cover it wrongly. And of course, always in the direction of downplaying the concerns. Again, was not on the homepage, We went to the coronavirus pandemic section. The headline there was, "It's time to wear a mask again." And then buried down below in the section that addresses the vaccines, the headline appears, but it is, "There is no increased stroke risk associated with the Pfizer booster." Exactly the opposite of what the CDC had said.
Yeah. So I'm not particularly alarmed by the statistic that you noted, 550,130. I'd need to see if there was even a causal link there. I am alarmed.
Well, let's see
by
the raw
New York
data.
Times. Right. But, people have strokes. There's a difference between coincidence and causation. And I'd need to see the study. What I am alarmed by, though, is the headline that you read, because it's indicative of everything that's been wrong with our conversation about this right from the beginning. And I'm afraid this is true on both sides, in that the New York Times is clearly unwilling ever to put out any information that could dissuade people from either masking in the early days or now getting the vaccine or the boosters, because it believes that the American public is full of children who need to be led to the right decision. And that, broadly speaking, is how the CDC has behaved as well. The CDC has managed us from the beginning. Instead of saying, here are the facts, here is our take on them, or here are the facts, make up your own mind, the CDC has put out misinformation at times in an attempt to nudge people into the behavior that it thought would be best. And as a result, it and the New York Times have lost a great deal of trust. There has been a similar mistake made on the right. Now, what I think should have happened in the early days is that we should have acknowledged that we do not normally live in circumstances such as we did in early 2020. Pandemics like this seem to come along every 100 years or so. We should have recognized that this was not just a flu, that it was serious, but it was also not, zombie-inspiring, flesh-eating bacteria, and that we were going to get a mitigating factor, probably a vaccine, that would by definition be untested, and that we should make allowances for that. Now, the vaccine has been really effective. It is not an accident that the number of people dying of COVID dropped in the way that it did when the vaccine came along. That's not a coincidence. But the vaccine is also not equivalent to, say, the polio vaccine. You get these people who say, well, what are you going to come after next? The polio vaccine? You're going to come to the flu jab? No, the difference here is that this was an experimental vaccine, and it may well be the case. We should have acknowledged this from the start. It may well be the case that it has some side effects, and a few of them lethal, but we didn't. Yeah. And so when conservatives correctly said that we should go easy on the mandates, because you don't want to mandate that people take experimental vaccines. Make them available, subsidize them if you want to, but don't mandate them. The left pushed back. But the right also made a mistake here in concert, which was, in order to attack the mandates, to underplay the efficacy of the vaccine. And so you've had this weird push-pull between some people on the right who have said, you know what, the vaccine doesn't work. It doesn't help. It's dangerous. It's killing athletes all over the place. Look at all these young people who are suddenly dying. Not really true. And people on the left who have said the vaccine is perfect. Not only will it save your life, it will stop you getting COVID. It will stop you transmitting COVID. It will make you better looking and taller as well. And this is all nonsense. What we're dealing with is an imperfect world in the midst of a completely unprecedented in our lifetimes circumstance, and a vaccine that did pretty well at what it was supposed to do, but is going to have some unfortunate side effects over time. And we can't talk about it because the loudest voices on the left and the right, and it's more complicated than that. There's a lot of anti-vax sentiment on the left as well, and pro-vax sentiment on the right, have just decided not to have that conversation in the way adults should. And the result has been this mess.
I have to say, I am more skeptical of the vaccines now than you are, and certainly than I was at the beginning, in part because of my lack of trust in any of these public health officials, And I would say that Vinay Prasad, who I do trust online, he's a doctor who's been neck deep in all of this from the beginning and been a real straight shooter. He's pro-vaccine. But he raised some of the concerns in response to this announcement that reminded me of why I'm having this feeling of distrust and questioning. first of all, Marty McCary of Johns Hopkins comes out and says CDC should make public the raw data set. Exactly right. How many? Exactly. Why did you conclude this? It must have been pretty significant for the CDC to issue this warning. Then Vinay Prasad, he's a hematologist and oncologist and professor in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the University of California, San Fran, says the following. This administration's vaccine policy has been horrible. They always err on the side of pushing doses. They initially decide the safety signal of myocarditis. They delayed polling J&J in young women. They never banned Moderna in young men. And they rubber-stamped kids' vaccines with inadequate efficacy data. Most recently, long after the emergency phase of the pandemic ended, the administration granted emergency use authorization to the bivalent booster down to 5-year-olds based initially on mouse data. And let's not forget, it was only 8 mice. And to this day, supported only by confounded observational studies, right? Not exactly the gold standard. Arguably, this is an illegal action. There is no emergency to justify boosting 20-year-old men who had 3 doses. He goes on to say, we know very little, but it appears a safety signal of stroke may be identified. He means safety signal like a problem, complication. Of course, there's nothing magic about 65, so it may also occur at younger ages. What's the absolute risk? Where is the press conference? Sadly, no further information followed. A sensible FDA commissioner would have held a press conference and stated what was known. Instead of that, you know what our FDA commissioner is doing? Well, he tweeted out a picture of himself here in, I guess, I don't know what it is, a grow house? It's a grow house. It's FDA Commissioner Dr. Robert Califf, who is talking about, yay, new controlled environment growing facility in Davis and learning how this new technology can boost the resiliency of our food supply. Off message, buddy, off message. Like Vinay Prasad's exactly right, Rich. And we're not going to get any of that. We're not going to get it because the media won't demand it. And if the media is not demanding it, we'll never get answers. Like many people these days, I am trying to eat healthier. And that is why I love good olive oil. And by good, I mean fresh. Olive oil packs the most flavor and healthiest nutrients when it's fresh from the farm. And that's the problem with supermarket olive oils. They're not fresh. They can sit on the shelf for many months growing stale. That's why I like my olive oil direct from small, award-winning farms, thanks to a guy named TJ Robinson, also known as the Olive Oil Hunter. He's going to make this easy for you. When I first tasted TJ's farm fresh oils, first I was skeptical. I'm like, what the hell's the difference in an olive oil? Well, I was wrong. You'll taste it yourself. They have these vibrant, kind of grassy flavors, and it's absolutely delicious on salad, veggies, pasta, meat, whatever you put olive oil on. As an introduction to his fresh pressed olive oil club, TJ's willing to send you a full-size $39 bottle of one of the world's finest artisanal olive oils for just $1. And that just helps him cover shipping. Best of all, there's never a commitment to buy anything, and you can cancel your membership at any time. Get your free $39 bottle for just $1 shipping and taste the difference freshness makes. Go to harvestfreshnow.com. harvestfreshnow.com for a free bottle and pay just $1 in shipping. harvestfreshnow.com. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.